Sawtooth National Forest is a federally protected area that covers 2,110,408 acres in the U.S. states of Idaho and Utah. Managed by the U.S.Forest Service in the U.S. Department of Agriculture, it was originally named the Sawtooth Forest Reserve in a proclamation issued by President Theodore Roosevelt on May 29, 1905. On August 22, 1972, a portion of the forest was designated as the Sawtooth National Recreation Area, which includes the Sawtooth, White Clouds, and Hemingway Boulders wilderness areas. The forest is managed as 4 units: the SNRA and the Fairfield, Ketchum, and Minidoka Ranger Districts. Sawtooth National Forest is named for the Sawtooth Mountains, which traverse part of the SNRA. The forest also contains the Albion, Black Pine, Boise, Boulder, Pioneer, Raft River, Smoky, Soldier, Sublette, and White Cloud mountain ranges, as well as Hindman Peak, the 9th highest point in Idaho at 12,009 feet above sea level. Sawtooth National Forest contains land cover types which include sagebrush steppe, spruce fir forests, alpine tundra, and over 1,100 lakes and 3,500 miles of rivers and streams. Plants and animals found only in the Sawtooth National Forest and adjacent lands include Christ's Indian paintbrush, Davis's spring parsley, the South Hills crossbill, and the Wood River sculpin. The area that is now Sawtooth National Forest was first occupied by people as early as 8000 BC and by the Shoshone tribe after 1700 AD. The first European descendants migrating from the eastern United States arrived in the area around the 1820s. They were mainly explorers, trappers, and prospectors, and they founded many of the current towns around what later became the forest. Sawtooth National Forest offers facilities for recreation, with 4 ski areas, whitewater and flatwater boating, hunting, 81 campgrounds, and over 1,000 miles of trails and roads for hiking, mountain biking, and all-terrain vehicle use, including 2 national recreation trails. Forest history. The Forest Reserve Act of 1891 gave the President the authority to establish forest reserves in the U.S. Department of the Interior. After passage of the Transfer Act of 1905, forest reserves became part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture in the newly created U.S. Forest Service. Sawtooth National Forest was created as the Sawtooth Forest Reserve in the Department of Agriculture by proclamation of President Theodore Roosevelt on May 29, 1905. The forest's initial area was 1,947,520 acres, and it was named after the Sawtooth Mountains in the northwestern part of the forest. On November 6, 1906, President Roosevelt announced the addition of 1,392,640 acres to the Sawtooth Forest Reserve, which then also constituted much of the present-day Salmon, Challis, and Boise National Forests. These lands were split into separate national forests by executive order on June 26 and July 1, 1908. The forest's area underwent a number of smaller changes in the early 20th century. The Fairfield Ranger District was established in 1906 and merged with the Shake Creek Ranger District in 1972 to form the present-day Fairfield District. The Cassia Forest Reserve was established on June 12, 1905, and the Raft River Forest Reserve on November 5, 1906. The names of the forest reserves were changed to national forests on March 4, 1907, formed from the consolidation of Cassia and Raft River National Forests. The Minidoka National Forest was created on July 1, 1908, and then added to Sawtooth National Forest on July 1, 1953. In 1936, Democratic U.S. Senator from Idaho James P. Pope introduced the first legislation to establish a national park in the Sawtooths. Under Pope's proposal, the park would have been approximately 30 miles long and 8 to 15 miles wide. The rest of Idaho's congressional delegation did not support the proposal, which occurred at a time when the National Park Service was taking a more preservation-oriented stance, and the bill died. On October 12, 1937, the Forest Service established the Sawtooth Primitive Area in the Sawtooth Mountains. Subsequently, Sawtooth National Forest began to extensively develop recreation opportunities, including new campgrounds, trails, and roads. In 1960, Democrat Frank Church, U.S. Senator from Idaho, first introduced legislation for a feasibility study to survey the area for national park status. While Church allowed the 1960 feasibility study legislation to die, he introduced a bill in 1963 to create Sawtooth Wilderness National Park, which would primarily encompass the existing Sawtooth Primitive Area. Although the 1963 bill also was not voted on, Church admitted that it was not designed to pass but rather to encourage thorough feasibility studies by both the Forest Service and National Park Service. A 1965 joint report by the two agencies recommended either a national park administered by the National Park Service or a national recreation area managed by the Forest Service. In April 1966, Church introduced two bills, one to establish Sawtooth National Park and another to establish the Sawtooth National Recreation Area. The SNRA bill was co-sponsored by Republican Leonard B. Jordan, another senator from Idaho, because it preserved the area while also permitting traditional uses such as logging, hunting, and grazing. The legislation was not supported by Idaho's members of the U.S. House of Representatives. In 1968, the American Smelting and Refining Company discovered a molybdenum deposit at the base of Castle Peak, the highest peak in the White Cloud Mountains. ASARCO filed paperwork with the Forest Service to construct roads and to allow for an open-pit mine below Castle Peak to extract the ore. The proposed mine would have been 350 feet deep, 700 feet wide, and 7,000 feet long. About 20,000 short tons of material would be processed daily, with 99.5% being deposited in waste piles and settling ponds. ASARCO estimated that the mine would create 350 jobs and $1 million in taxes per year, while the roads would open up opportunities for further exploration. The Forest Service would not be able to stop mining and protect the White Cloud Mountains because the General Mining Act of 1872 gave mining rights to anyone who had located a loader placer. Nationally, opposition to the mine mounted, while in 1970 Republican Idaho Governor Don Samuelson voiced support for the mine, saying that ASARCO was not going to tear down mountains. They are only going to dig a hole. Quote. He also characterized Castle Peak as nothing but sagebrush on one side and scraggly trees on the other. Samuelson lost re-election in 1970 to Cecil DeAndras, a Democrat and supporter of preserving the forest, who later served as U.S. Interior Secretary in the Carter administration. In March 1971, Idaho's congressional delegation, which included Senators Church and Jordan and Republican Representatives James A. McClure and Orville H. Hansen, was finally united and introduced legislation to create the SNRA. On August 22, 1972, Public Law 22-400 establishing the SNRA, covering 756,019 acres, and banning mining passed both the House of Representatives and Senate and was signed into law by Republican President Richard Nixon. This legislation included the White Cloud and Boulder Mountains as part of the SNRA. The 217,088-acre Sawtooth Primitive Area became the Sawtooth Wilderness as part of the National Wilderness Preservation System under the Wilderness Act of 1964. The original bill also authorized $19.8 million for land acquisition and up to $26 million for development. The SNRA was dedicated in a ceremony held on the shores of Redfish Lake on September 1, 1972. The Burley and Twin Falls Ranger districts of Sawtooth National Forest were consolidated on October 16, 2002 into the Minidoka Ranger District. On August 7, 2015, President Obama signed the Sawtooth National Recreation Area and Jerry Peak Wilderness Additions Act to create the Hemingway Boulders, Jim McClure Jerry Peak, and White Clouds Wilderness Areas, which cover a total of 275,665 acres of central Idaho, primarily in Sawtooth National Forest. Management. Sawtooth National Forest is managed by the U.S.Forest Service, an agency within the Department of Agriculture, has 4 units: the Fairfield, Ketchum, and Minidoka Ranger Districts and Sawtooth National Recreation Area. The Minidoka Ranger District is separated into the Albion, Black Pine, Cassia, Raft River, and Sublet divisions. Guard stations and work camps dot the forest. The SNRA headquarters and main visitor center were located north of the city of Ketchum, while there is a ranger station in Stanley and visitor center at Redfish Lake. There are more than 25,000 acres of private land in holdings within the forest, and it is bordered by the Boise and Salmon Rivers National Forests as well as private, state, and Bureau of Land Management land. Curlew National Grassland is 1.5 miles from the Sublet Division's eastern boundary. Small portions of the area originally designated as Sawtooth National Forest are managed by the Boise and Chalice National Forests, while the Sawtooth manages portions of the Boise and Chalice National Forests. Sawtooth National Forest balances interests of different groups, such as those interested in recreation, preservation, or resource extraction. The forest practices conservation of resources in some areas, allowing for production of raw materials, such as lumber for construction purposes and wood pulp for paper products, alongside recreational uses, while in other areas only recreation is permitted. Additionally, mineral extraction through mining and oil and natural gas exploration and recovery are also conducted, though in Sawtooth National Forest this has become less common due to a consensus to protect the natural surroundings. Leases offered to ranchers to allow them to graze cattle and sheep on the forest are common. The forest provides guidelines and enforces environmental regulations to ensure that resources are not overexploited and that necessarily commodities are available for future generations. Wilderness. The Sawtooth Wilderness was originally designated the Sawtooth Primitive Area in 1937 before becoming part of the National Wilderness Preservation System in 1972 under the Wilderness Act. Although entirely managed by Sawtooth National Forest, only about a quarter of the Sawtooth Wilderness lies within the area congressionally designated as Sawtooth National Forest, with the majority lying in Boise National Forest and a relatively small portion in Salmon Rivers National Forest. According to the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the Sawtooth Wilderness has some of the clearest air in the lower lower 48 states. On August 7, 2015, President Barack Obama signed the Sawtooth National Recreation Area and Cherry Peak Wilderness Additions Act, creating the Hemingway Boulders, Jim McClure Cherry Peak, and White Clouds Wilderness areas, covering a combined 275,665 acres of Sawtooth National Forest, Salmon National Forest, and Bureau of Land Management land after it passed Congress on August 4, 2015. The Hemingway Boulders Wilderness is entirely within SNRA, while all but 450 acres of the White Clouds Wilderness is in the SNRA, with the rest managed by the BLM. The Jim McClure Cherry Peak Wilderness is entirely outside the administered area of Sawtooth National Forest, but partially within the area designated as Sawtooth National Forest and thus managed by Salmon National Forest and the BLM. The 2015 bill and previous versions were introduced by Republican Representative Mike Simpson, while prior bills had proposed to designate 312,000 acres of wilderness as part of the controversial Central Idaho Economic Development and Recreation Act. CIEDRA would have opened over 500,000 acres adjacent to the new wilderness areas to motorized vehicle use, given 5,693 acres of public land to local municipalities, and established a no net loss policy for motorized trails. Prior to the 2015 wilderness designations, the White Cloud and Boulder Mountains were part of the largest unprotected roadless area in the United States outside of Alaska. In the absence of congressional action that would designate the Boulder-White Clouds region as wilderness, the area had been studied for possible protection as a national monument by presidential proclamation under the Antiquities Act. Former Secretary of the Interior Dirk Kempthorne initially studied the area for national monument status, but did not recommend it because congressional action seemed likely. The 2015 bill passed after receiving increased attention when President Obama indicated he would designate a national monument in the area if the wilderness bill did not pass. Additionally, other large areas of the forest are parts of proposed wilderness areas, such as through the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act. These other proposals have gained no support among Idaho's congressional delegation because the bills could place undue public use and development restrictions on Idaho's public lands. The Wilderness Act enhanced the protection statuses of remote or undeveloped land already contained within federally administered protected areas. Passage of the Act ensured that no human improvements would take place aside from those already existing. The protected status in wilderness-designated zones prohibits road and building construction, oil and mineral exploration or mining, and logging, and also prohibits the use of motorized equipment and bicycles. The ways people may enter wilderness areas are on foot or on horseback. Geography and geology. The elevation in the forest ranges from 4,514 feet at Rock Creek south of Twin Falls to 12,009 feet above sea level at the top of Hindman Peak, an elevation gain of 7,495 feet. The mountains of the Mini-Durka district are part of the Basin and Range Province, while those in the northern section of the forest are part of the Rocky Mountains. The Sawtooth Mountains have at least 50 peaks over 10,000 feet high. The mountains of Sawtooth National Forest have a varied geological history. The northern Sawtooth Mountains formed from the Eocene Sawtooth batholith, while south of Altura's Lake the Sawtooth, Smoky, and Soldier Mountains formed from the Cretaceous granodiorite of the Idaho batholith. Foothills of the Smoky Mountains are from the Pennsylvanian and Permian dolomite formations. The White Cloud Mountains are underlain by the gray granodiorite of the Idaho batholith. while some of the exposed rock is baked and pure limestone from the Permian Grand Prize Formation. The central mass of the Raft River Mountains consists of Precambrian metamorphic rocks with Elba quartzite and interlayered schist on the southern slopes and Cambrian quartzite outcrops on the western part of the range. Below the Sublette Mountains, the Phosphoria Formation, a basal phosphorite overlain by a thick sequence of chert and Kati sandstone, reaches its greatest thickness. Soils in the northern part of the forest are generally deep and highly fertile in lowlands, but shallow and less so on steep slopes. In the Minidoka Ranger District, soils are generally productive, derived from volcanic and sedimentary material, shallow on steep slopes, and deep in the lowlands. The Boulder, Pioneer, Sawtooth, Smoky, and White Cloud Mountains are generally jagged, while the ranges on the Minidoka District, the Albion, Black Pine, Raft River, and Sublette Mountains, are generally smooth and rolling. Galena Summit is a mountain pass at 8,701 feet on Idaho State Highway 75 between Stanley and Ketchum, roughly where the Boulder and Smoky Mountains meet. While not in Sawtooth National Forest, Banner Creek Summit is a 7,037-foot in-mountain pass on Idaho State Highway 21 at the northern end of the Sawtooth Mountains at the border of the Boise and Chalice National Forests. Waterways. There are over 1,100 lakes covering 7,600 acres and an estimated 7,500 miles of temporary and permanent streams and rivers in the forest. Over 680 miles of streams are found in the Fairfield district, over 500 miles in the Ketchum district, and over 450 miles in the Minidoka district. The entire northern portion of the forest is in the watershed of the Snake River, a tributary of the Columbia River. The Salmon Rivers' headwaters are in the upper Sawtooth Valley, and this river drains much of the SNRA and follows a tortuous, overall northwesterly course before flowing into the Snake River 425 miles downstream. The eastern side of the Sawtooth Mountains is drained by the South Fork of the Payette River, the northern Soldier Mountains, southern Smoky Mountains, and much of the Fairfield district are drained by the South Fork of the Boise River, which flows into Anderson Ranch Reservoir just west of the forest. The Ketchum district, part of the SNRA, and the southern slopes of the Fairfield district are drained by the Bigwood River. Much of the Minidoka district is also drained by the Snake River via the Raft River and other tributaries, but portions of the Black Pine and Raft River Mountains drain into the Great Salt Lake. The annual water yield from the forest is estimated just below 2,300,000 acre-foot. Most of the forest lakes are the result of glaciation and occur in the SNRA in the Sawtooth and White Cloud Mountains, but lakes can be found in most of the other mountain ranges of the forest. There are over 20 lakes in the Fairfield district, 90 in the Ketchum district, and 6 lakes and 3 reservoirs in the Minidoka district. The largest lake on the forest is Redfish Lake, a moraine-dammed lake that is 4.5 miles long, 0.72 miles wide, and up to 387 feet deep. Other large lakes include Alturas, Pettit, Sawtooth, Stanley, and Yellow Belly Lakes. Seismology. The Sawtooth Fault is a 40 miles long east-dipping normal fault that runs along the base of the Sawtooth Mountains and was discovered and mapped in 2010. It is believed to be capable of producing an earthquake measuring up to 7.5 on the Richter magnitude scale, with one of the most recent large earthquakes occurring 4,000 years ago and an earlier one 7,000 years ago. Glaciology. Sawtooth National Forest has a history of alpine glaciation that is most obvious in the Sawtooth Mountains, and while no surface glaciers exist today, perennial snowfields and rock glaciers remain, usually on north or east-facing slopes. There have been 202 perennial snowfields mapped in the Sawtooth Mountains, and while none have been mapped elsewhere on the forest, some may still exist in the Boulder, Pioneer, and White Cloud Mountains. The Sawtooth Mountains were last extensively glaciated in the Pleistocene, but glaciers probably existed during the Little Ice Age, which ended around 1850 AD. Evidence of past glaciation is abundant in the Sawtooth, White Cloud, Boulder, and Smoky Mountains, as well as the north and east-facing slopes of the Albion, Raft River, and Soldier Mountains. Remnants of the glaciers include glacial lakes, moraines, horns, hanging valleys, cirques, and aretes. Climate. Much of Sawtooth National Forest receives less than 15 inches of precipitation a year, with higher elevations typically receiving more precipitation. Summer and early fall are usually drier than winter in most of the forest, while in the lowlands of the Minidoka district, such as near Oakley, the spring may be the wettest season. Winter snowfall provides a steady water supply to the streams during the summer. Locally, climate may depend on mountains that block moist air and river valleys that can funnel weather systems. Dry lightning is common in summer and fall. The growing season ranges from 150 days in the lower valleys to less than 30 days in the highest alpine areas. The climate charts below are ordered from highest to lowest in both latitude and elevation. Human history. Spear points dating to 12,000 years ago document the earliest presence of Paleo-Indians in the area, and there are nearly 1,500 known heritage sites in the forest. After AD 1700, the Shoshone, also known as the Sheep-Eater people, as well as the Bannock and Northern Paiute tribes, harvested fish, game, fruits, timber, tubers, and rocks for tools while living in small groups at the northern end of the forest. Trappers and explorers arrived in southern Idaho in the early 19th century. They established immigrant trails in the region by 1849, including the Oregon and California trails. The forest was used by early settlers primarily for extractive industries. Fur trappers of the Hudson's Bay Company discovered the Stanley Basin in the northern part of the forest in the 1820s, but mostly avoided it due to the scarcity of beaver. For early settlers, the welfare of the community was dependent upon timber supply, regulation of stream flow for irrigation, and use of the land for cattle range. Mining began in the 1860s, peaked in the 1880s, and fluctuated over the following century with the extraction of gold, silver, lead, and zinc. The Black Pine division of the forest was explored in the late 1800s, and the Tallman mine began producing gold in the 1920s, with production peaking from 1949 to 1954. The Black Pine mine again produced gold from 1992 through November 1997, when the mine's parent company, Pegasus Gold, declared bankruptcy. The location of the mine has since been reclaimed. Towns around the forest, including Stanley, Ketchum, and Sawtooth City, were founded as mining towns in the latter part of the 19th century by prospectors and trappers, including Civil War veteran Captain John Stanley, after whom the town of Stanley is named. Ketchum is named after the trapper and guide David Ketchum, while the Sublette Mountains are named after trapper William Sublette, who lived in the area in the 1830s. Most of the logging in the region was for firewood and timber for miners and homesteaders. For much of the 20th century, sheep and cattle grazing were the primary large-scale land uses of the forest. Sheep drives were common in the Wood River Valley after the mining boom, and shepherds from southern Idaho drove the flocks north to graze the upper elevation areas in Sawtooth National Forest. The original sheep herders were Basque Americans, while today many of the sheep herders are Peruvians contracted through the Department of Labor. In 1936, the Union Pacific Railroad and its chairman W. Averell Harriman developed Sun Valley and the Bald Mountain ski area, the first winter destination resort in the United States developed for the purpose of increasing railroad passenger numbers. The area became popular with celebrities, including Ernest Hemingway and Gary Cooper. On July 2, 1961, Hemingway committed suicide at his home overlooking the Bigwood River. He is buried at the Ketchum Cemetery. On February 9, 1945, a B-24 Liberator bomber crashed on Mount Harrison in the Albion Division of the Forest during a training mission in dense fog. All 9 crew were killed in the crash, and their bodies were found inside the plane and recovered over the following days. The plane's remains have never been removed. A memorial service was held on July 29, 2004, and a plaque was permanently installed honoring those who died.